Welcome everybody to GoLocal Live. I'm Josh Fenton, CEO and co-founder. A couple quick notes. Want to thank Courtney Nicolato from the United Way, who was on earlier today. I think they are up to about $700,000 on their one-day fundraise of $1 million to nonprofits across Rhode Island. Congratulations to them. Please make a donation if you can. It's on our site, and you can click through to find the nonprofit that you support most. Also, thanks Dr. Fine for joining us at noontime. Obviously, some strong insights into what the modeling looks like and what the potential impact is to Rhode Island. Governor Raimondo is starting in a few minutes. And then at 4 o'clock, we'll have Brown University's Smart Health on, talking about autism. Now I'd like to welcome Ken Doctor, national expert on media. He is, for people in my business, the go-to fair broker to talk to about really what's going on and what the future of the business of news is. Ken, thanks so much for Skyping in. Good to be with you. Ken, obviously, you look at the business side of this on an almost nonstop basis. The biggest newspaper group in the United States was the joining of Gannett plus Gatehouse. The deal was consummated in November. It was going to be a tough road to hoe for that conglomerate that has 300 daily newspapers and another 1,000 weeklies. What's their fate right now? Well, just this morning they suspended their dividend, which has been really important to prop up that share price over the time of the merger, and their furloughs and layoffs are going forward. We're just getting a count on those across the country. They're the first company to do it. It is amazing. I did cover that. I've called it the consolidation games of all this M&A in the newspaper business. And Gannett Gatehouse, now called Gannett, controls 25%, or 1/4 of all the daily newspaper readership in the country. So this is a company that was in the midst, or really the beginning, of putting together two companies, and that's really hard in good times. It was a distressed industry to start out with. And now they are just dealing with problems that they are not ready for. And so we're going to see what the next shoes to drop are. They have massive payments on a $1.8 billion loan they took out to finance the merger at 11.5%. And I raised in a piece I wrote yesterday the D word, as I called it, default. Too early, of course, but their ability to make those payments and stay a going concern, if this crisis lasts for months and months, which it might, is going to be something to watch. Ken, that was a tough deal. They had to utilize Apollo Leon Black for the financing of that deal at 11.5% interest. Providence used to be home to the New England La Cosa Nostra. I think that's what level of interest that they used to charge back in the day. And there were two concerns that quarter over quarter we're losing 10, 15% on print advertising revenue, circulation, across the board, just a tough business. How long, they were never in a great cash position. How long can they survive when advertisers, Macy's closed up, furloughed 125,000 employees? That's probably their biggest Sunday insert across the country. How long, and by the way, Macy's isn't paying any bills on a quick dime now. How long can they survive from a cash standpoint? I haven't done that analysis. I haven't seen anybody else do it yet. It's moving too quickly. But if you look at their model, most of these daily newspapers have relied on advertising still for 60%, 65% of their revenue, and reader revenue, subscriptions largely, either print or digital, for a third. Now, it's been trending closer and closer because, as you said, they've been losing 10% plus of print advertising for 3 years in a row now. But still, what they have today is they've got this circulation revenue, which is fairly stable. The print people aren't going to cancel immediately. All these companies are seeing more digital subscription starts, and that's good, but it's a small trickle of money. On the advertising side, they're losing 30 to 50% of all their ad revenue in April. And it could be more than 50%, some have told me.
So to the extent this becomes the whole second quarter, which it looks like it may be now, they're going to be an extremely stressed company. And the tension here is that in all these markets, including a Providence, they have cut so much. How much more can they cut and still put out a product to keep enough of those subscribers subscribing and to bring in some advertising when we all go out in the world again? So there isn't a date, there isn't a number, but clearly the stress is very, very strong on this company. And as I wrote yesterday, this is, I think, going to accelerate a very bad trend in American newspapers, which is financial companies controlling the bulk of the American daily press. Already they control about a third of it, and it could well be a half by the end of this year.
Do you foresee, listen, from our standpoint, we're talking to a lot of smart doctors every day, healthcare experts, not only here in Providence, but talking to people around the world. This isn't going to end in 3 months or even 6 months. We're in a year-long battle against this virus until a vaccine comes out. And then those experts say 3 months to manufacture it, 3 months to distribute it. If that timeline, let's just say it's foreseeable that the rest of 2020 is a very difficult financial year across all spectrums. Can American newspapers survive that period of time?
Some can, some can't. It's going to depend on decisions they're making, but really this month in a lot of ways, and their financial capacity. So to the extent that they are heavily burdened by debt and have essentially every dollar allocated, they had every dollar allocated beforehand of so much for Gannett, so much is going to go to Apollo for debt repayment, so much is going to go to dividends, and so much was going to go to maintain the business as much as they could. Now the dividend has been suspended. They are probably negotiating with Apollo on lengthening that 5-year deal. And they're trying to hold on to enough employees to actually create a product. One of the things we're going to see dramatically, I think, in the next month is a number of newspaper chains and individual newspapers announce that they're no longer going to print 7 days a week. We've seen this happen slowly over 8 years now since Advance Publications did it in New Orleans and Cleveland and other places. Tampa Bay Times just went from 7 days to Sunday and Wednesday in a very big market, Tampa. I think what we're going to see out of this, and especially, Josh, with the timeline you just talked about in terms of our sequestration, is we're going to emerge on the end of this basically where a lot of us thought we would be, certainly by 2025, of a Sunday newspaper, which is really a weekend newspaper, much more feature-like, weekend review, daily through the day digital, and that will allow a great cutting of costs on the manufacturing end, printing, presses, distribution, trucks, all of that. It will save a lot of money unless they own their own presses, and then that's a further complication. But if they outsource, as many of them do, it'll save a lot of money. And the question will be, you'll save the money on the cost end, but what happens? Do you break the habit of all those 7-day subscribers who are largely in their 60s and 70s and 80s and are paying $500, $600, $700 a year for the paper? If they lose a lot of those customers, the decline gets further and spiraling down. But that's what happened to try to maintain this. Because in the scenario you pointed to, retail doesn't come back. And retail's already been damaged greatly going into this by Amazon. So if retail doesn't come back, then newspapers have far less advertising opportunity. They're going to flip the switch, they're going to go digital, and they're going to hope for the best.
So going digital sounds easy. 10 years into GoLocal, it's not always, it's not a quick switch. First of all, you need two things. You need a lot of smart people that understand technology. And secondly, you need time to be able to make that transition. They have neither of those opportunities. They don't have a bastion of technology talent. Technology talent is the one element of this new economy that we're entering into that's going to be on demand. It's going to be hard to recruit or even to contract for those resources. And if you look at the Boston Globe, as you know, maybe a successful transition to digital. The jury's still out, hard to tell, closely held private company. That's taken them 5 years to get to 120,000 digital subscribers in a wildly affluent community.
That's right. That's right. You're right. Time, it's time and technology, and the time is a funny thing. I got into the digital business 1995 in St. Paul and came out to San Jose for Knight Ridder newspapers, which was then the second biggest one, and we thought we were at the beginning of the digital transition in 1998. So that's a long time ago now. So the newspaper companies have had time, but they have squandered it. They haven't used it well. I was still hearing from people, by 2025, we hope we have it figured out. And now 2025 is here. So the time is a big problem. And you point to the talent and technology. I guess you got 3 T's there. But if you look at the talent and technology, because this is a declining industry and everybody knows it, it's been hard for them to attract the kinds of talent that you've been able to attract to a new enterprise. And people say, like, it might be uncertain at the beginning, but, Josh is building something. It's going, it's growing. Okay, let's go see what we can do there. That's not the attitude in these companies. So that gets down to, and it's kind of buried in all of the terrible news today, culture. And the culture of these companies has not changed enough. And that is setting them on a very bad path at this point.
Listen, democracies are fueled by enterprise journalism. It's not fueled by press release journalism. Still today, newspapers provide a significant portion. They once used to provide 80-90% of all enterprise journalism. That's a little less so today as major digital companies have emerged both nationally and in some local markets. What is America going to look like without a Providence Journal, without numerous daily newspapers that are still the bastion of local news?
It's a really interesting question, and I think it is a question we have to really think about how we're asking, because it is a profound question. It's the right one, but it's also not looking forward. It's looking at today. The newspapers across the country are so emaciated compared to where they were 5, 10, 15 years ago, that in many places, local democracy cannot depend on that reporting, even basic meeting reporting of county boards and city councils to figure out what's going on. So it is bad today, and it is getting worse. But if you look at it today, what I have focused on, as much as this idea of news deserts, which we talk about, where there's areas that simply don't have a newspaper, and that's bad, but that tends to be rural Wyoming, for instance. There are now cities that have what I call ghost newspapers. It's a nice nameplate. It's a nameplate everybody goes, that's our paper. It's black letter. I know that. But the content is like a couple of local stories written by people who don't have much experience because they're cheap to pay. They're right out of school. And news from AP, from Europe or Asia. Columns written by the mayors instead of coverage of City Hall by reporters who know it. This is the problem. And the problem we have, and we see it in the recent elections, is a basic growing ignorance of just facts of what's going on the ground. We talk about it at a national level and the polarization and politicization, but on a local level, it's a vacuum. There is simply not enough facts here. And in Santa Cruz, California, where I live, I had a conversation with the head of the county board, and our newspaper is owned by the Alden Group, which is the most rapacious of these financial owners. And he said to me, he's like, just before the freeze, when I could get out and talk to people, he said, yeah, what you write is really true. He said, but you really don't understand it from my side of the table of being a head of the county board. He said, I cannot have a conversation in the community with people where we have a common set of facts. It's all Facebook and Twitter nonsense, and it's not real facts. And I said, is it worse than 5 years ago? And he said, it's much worse than 5 years ago. And unfortunately, it's happening all over the country.
Absolutely. Alden, of course, is the acquirer of a private equity group that acquired papers like the Denver Post and the Boston Herald. The Boston Herald has now been sliced and diced from a newsroom of a couple hundred, and it's now down to maybe a couple dozen. And has allowed the Boston Globe to have sort of free reign over reporting on Boston.
That's right.
Is Alden sitting there? Is the market so damaged that even an Alden wouldn't want Gannett because there's not enough assets to strip?
It's a fascinating question. I'm sure it's a tougher exercise for Heath Freeman, who is the president of Alden, but it is simply that. It is a mathematical exercise. How cheap will these assets become one way or another? And what kind of residual value do they have on the other side of this economic calamity we're in? That's the question that they are probably putting their pencils to right now. Although it's a very, in terms of duration, it's really hard to figure out. They don't want to be newspaper operators. They want to be profit maximizers. So any industry, and people have likened this, they likened the newspaper industry to waste management. And they said, well, it's just like waste management. It's like, that was a declining industry. But if you can consolidate it and consolidate and consolidate it, you can make a lot of money, which most people in our business don't really want to hear. But that's the way you look at it if you're a profit maximizer. That's how they're looking at it. And yes, they could with enough of a skeleton staff, digital mainly delivery, say a Sunday product, access to the legals advertising, which still supports print products, obituaries, some advertising, and if they can retain enough of those print subscribers, there's profit there. If there's profit there, the answer will be yes. At X price, what's the price?
Media in general is taking a big hit. Nexstar, one of the largest television groups in the country, they own one of the affiliates here, Sinclair, obviously as well. Both of those stocks have been punished greatly over the past few months, and they lost huge advertising revenue streams with the cancellation of the NCAA basketball tournament as well as the Olympics. Those stocks are now trading at, I think, around a third, 40% of what they were on their 52-week high. They're going to start making cuts. Some of them had robust newsrooms. Do we just see this massive number of journalists being shed over the next 8, 9, 10 months?
Again, depending on the capacity of those companies and the strategy of the financial capacity and the strategies of those companies. How many journalists, from a journalist point of view, from a civic mission point of view, you say, I want to keep these newsrooms as whole as possible because we're here, like to make some money, but we're here to serve this community. That's our old model. If you don't have that model foremost in your mind and say, like, we're gonna maintain X profit and we'll cut wherever we need to do that, then we are going to see, and we are seeing today, and we're going to see a lot more cutting across the board of traditional media. And the numbers you described, Josh, are interesting. I mean, newspaper stocks largely have shed maybe 90% of their value. And so if TV stocks, shed, a half or 2/3 or 1/3 to 2/3, somewhere in there, it's a good proxy for where these businesses are at. Local TV stations have this huge revenue stream of retransmission fees, which my sources have told me is fairly stable through the next 3 years. This is before the pandemic, but I do not know that it's going to change. The pandemic is going to change that because it's all contracted. It still might, though. They are dependent on advertising, and what I'm hearing, while newspapers are telling me 30 to 50% down in advertising in April, the TV companies are telling me right now 20 to 30% down. So all the same forces on newspapers are on TV, but TV has this retransmission. And then, but TV also has this other existential question of all of delivery, of on-demand delivery of content, and obviously of entertainment content, but of news content. So on a negative end, we can look at it 2020s as almost a Blade Runner landscape of, you could see the decimation of local news, which has been greatly weakened over the last decade, just being knocked down to the nubs. And then the question is, what could replace it? What should replace it? I would have thought there would have been more replacements by now, but there are relatively few GoLocals, or another dozen organizations that are saying, we're really going to try to cover this city well in a new way. There's not many of them. So will there be more of them? I would hope so. And I'm an optimist, but I can tell you I have not seen them. The financing to even try them in many places is really hard to get. But so we're in a new reality of what local news may be and should be. And on the positive end, there are models. There are 3 or 4 good models out there that could be expanded. On the negative end, there are people with money, companies like Sinclair, that could say, this is a pretty good opportunity. If we could buy up cheap or start local media in purple states, this could be the cheapest way to affect the elections in the 2020s.
Well, I was going to go there next. Literally, when you've got a situation of a Gannett, which you could pick up for pennies on the dollar, what stops a George Soros or a conservative billionaire from picking up 300 daily newspapers, whether they're liberal or conservative, and having tremendous influence over a portion of older voters who are that demographic, the most likely to go and vote, and control the narrative of America?
The only thing, in truth, that's stopping it today is imagination. That they have not. Now we go back to, when it was 8-10 years ago, the Koch brothers, when both were alive and very active, were very close to buying the Tribune company. This is before Tribune even split into TV and newspaper arms.
Right.
And it was only the picketing of an investor's home in L.A. and the shaming of him that stopped that sale from going through. So the Kochs tried it. We almost got very close, and that would have been a Chicago Tribune and Baltimore Sun and others in Florida and Hartford. Sinclair, I have not heard that they are interested in this, and it could be anywhere along the political spectrum. It certainly makes a lot of sense, and the fact that the industry and really Americans as voters are so vulnerable to that possibility is absurd. Part of the reason is the wonderful First Amendment that we enjoy as journalists and as readers, and the separation of government and the press. So there's no regulation of the print press or the digital press as there is of broadcast. But in this case, that means there's also no weapon to really stop that kind of sale.
We're faced with this tremendous amount of change, more change than maybe has ever taken place in such a short period of time in American history. If you think of the Great Depression and World War II, that was a 15-year period in which those events took. And now, in 30 days, the nation's economy has been transformed. We're facing the biggest health crisis maybe since 1918 and the Spanish flu. Where will private equity, if you're going to look at any kind of transformation, private equity has sort of stayed out of the digital startup world because of the failure of Patch. It was a double-edged sword for companies like us. Because Patch was not the success that it was intended to be, it really scared away major investors. It actually gave a lot of us time to figure it out. It takes time to figure it out. And will private equity say, let's go back and look at this? Because if you're a local company, you have to. Facebook has value and Google has value, but you've got to get connected to content to have relevancy. Will folks start to look at this as a new market coming out of, and maybe the reinvention of news organizations coming out of this debacle?
I think certainly they will, not at this moment of just incredible duress, but
They're
will.
holding on to every dollar they have.
Are. And they have and they will. So interestingly, with Apollo. So Apollo's holding this $1.8 billion note, which is a big note, but it's a big company. Yeah. This is a company that tried to buy what was then Digital First Media about 5 years ago. That's Alden, it's MNG Enterprises, same company. Right. That's American News, Denver Post, et cetera, and Boston Herald, as you noted. They tried to buy it. And the reason they tried to buy it is they saw in about 2015 exactly the possibility you're seeing. They're saying, like, there's tremendous change here, but people are always going to want local news, and there's always going to be the need for local merchants to advertise. So is there a model in here if we could buy this and transition it? And they had a plan to buy the company, and then to get rid of daily print at that point, keep Sunday, maybe keep Wednesday, go profoundly digital, and they thought they could have a very profitable business model if they did all this right. They ended up disagreeing with Alden about $30 to $50 million, did not buy it. But you're right, out of all of this, and as this settles, however long it takes to settle, you say, clearly, we have 3,000 miles here. People live in all these places. They want information and news, and there are commercial possibilities. What I think the question is, and it's a fascinating one, is they do not believe at this moment that there are, even in 2020, before the pandemic, there are models that are successful, that are expandable, and that are exportable. They don't see it. They still say, patch. Oh, patch didn't work. They don't say, oh, this thing, it's small, but maybe it's working. And that thing, that might work. Here's three things. They don't see it at this point. That will change. When? I don't know.
Listen, for the models like us, and there's 5 or 6 around the country that have had some longevity and had some success, they're leading news sources in their city or their state. The key to their survival will be how much cash they had going into this. And by the way, there wasn't a lot of planning opportunity. Either you've got cash in the bank and you can run it for 6 months or longer, and if you don't, survival of the fittest, even the best idea will just simply run out of cash.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Ken, what's the timeline? Let's just go back to Gannett as we finish up. What's the timeline for their survival? Is this 30 days, 60 days? They've got to make more changes in the next short period of time than they have ever made in their entire history, maybe combined.
I don't know. I can't put a number on it because I haven't run the numbers myself. I think we're going to see in the next 90 days this, though. We're going to see more dramatic cutting of jobs. Already, this is a company that said they were going to cut $300 million, mainly in headcount, to pay for the acquisition, and said at the end of 2019 that they had only cut $90 million so far. So they had planned another $200 million at least. So you have that kind of starting out and going, you kind of gulp and you say, wow, okay, how do they do that? Then they're announcing furloughs and layoffs. Those are going to be very, very deep. You're going to see smaller titles close. You're going to see the dropping of 7-day, I think, in some markets announced, and whether they implement that within a month's time or 3 months' time, because there's a lot of logistics there. And it threatens to mangle the whole transition if you do it poorly anyhow. But I think they're going to make those decisions. And I would bet that they are already negotiating with Apollo in terms of delaying those payments and putting off those payments. And Apollo, you look at it from a lender point of view, just like all the banks are sending all of us notes saying, hey, you need some help, you need to talk, you need to miss a payment, we can talk. Apollo's really in the same shape. But what's Apollo want to do? They want to foreclose and run this company? I don't think so. So I think those are the things that will happen. And I think they're probably all in progress right now. And I'll do more reporting on it and find out more specifically soon.
Ken, thanks so much for joining us today. Hopefully we can have you back as these issues play out. Critical to America's future information structure and news organizations, and really want to thank you for taking the time.
Quite welcome. Glad to do it.
4 o'clock, we'll be back with Smart Health with Brown University. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Stay tuned for a number of other stories. Kate Nagel has an interesting one breaking on an effort to kick off the census between the city of Providence and city of Central Falls, and that digital effort getting hacked today. So stay tuned on that as well. Thanks everyone.